Okay, and to our members, we are going to be starting the YouTube feed in about 45 seconds. So that just means that you will be having hot mics from here on out. Thank you so much.
The Judiciary Committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Pursuant to notice of February 2nd, I am pleased to call to order the organizational meeting of the members of the Committee on the Judiciary for the 117th Congress. To ascertain the presence of a quorum, I ask the clerk to please call the roll of members.
Mr. Nadler?
Here.
Ms. Lofgren?
Here.
Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Cohen?
Here.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
There he is. There he is, right there.
Turn on the video.
Yeah, he's there.
Members, some members need to turn on their videos, please.
Mr. Cohen?
Here, present.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
Present. Georgia is present.
Hold with me, Travis.
Oh. Mr. Johnson, please turn on your video.
Can you come back to him?
You go.
Keep going.
Mr. Deutsch? Ms. Bass?
Here.
Mr. Jeffries?
Johnson.
Mr. Cicilline?
Johnson is here.
Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Mr. Raskin? Ms. Jayapal?
Here.
Ms. Demings? Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Garcia? Mr. Neguse?
Here.
Ms. McBath? Mr. Stanton? Ms. Dean?
Here.
Ms. Escobar?
Present.
Mr. Jones? Ms. Ross?
Here.
Ms. Bush? Ms. Bush?
They are. I'll go to vote on the floor, I think.
Let's go on.
Mr. Jordan?
Here.
Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Gomert? Mr. Issa? Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates?
For some reason it said headphones.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana,
But I think that should be fine.
Mr. Biggs, Mr. McClintock, Mr. Stube, Mr. Tiffany, Mr. Massey, Mr. Roy, Mr. Bishop, Ms. Fishbach, Ms. Sparts, Mr. Fitzgerald, Mr. Bentz, Mr. Owens, Mr. Massey,
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, this is Hank Johnson. I am present.
Good.
Mr. Johnson, you've been recorded.
Are there any other members present who have not been recorded? I would remind all members that in order to be recorded as present and voting, your videos must be turned on.
Mr. Chairman, there are 20 Democrats and 14 Republicans present.
A quorum is present. I would like to remind members that we've established an email address and distribution list dedicated to circulating amendments, exhibits, motions, or other written materials that members might want to offer as part of our meeting today. If you would like to submit materials, please send them to the email address that has been previously distributed to your offices, and we will circulate the materials to members and staff as quickly as we can. I would also ask all members, both those in person and those attending remotely, to mute your microphones when you are not speaking. This will help prevent feedback and other technical issues. You may unmute yourself at any time you seek recognition. I want to welcome all the returning and new members of the committee to our full committee organizational meeting for the 117th Congress. We meet today to introduce new members of the committee on both sides of the aisle, to adopt our committee rules of procedure for the 117th Congress, and to ratify subcommittee chairs and ranking members and the assignment of members to subcommittees. This committee historically has been one of the busiest and most productive committees in the House, and I expect that to remain true this Congress. Although we often consider matters that generate strong partisan disagreements, I also hope that we will find many issues on which we can work together on a bipartisan basis. I look forward to working with all the members of the committee and to the important work we will produce together. At this time, I would like to welcome and introduce the new members of the committee. We are fortunate to have 3 new Democratic members joining the committee this year. They come from diverse backgrounds and bring a broad range of experiences that will inform our work on this committee. Mondaire Jones was elected to his first term in November, representing New York's 17th District. After graduating from Stanford University, Congressman Jones joined the Office of Legal Policy in the U.S. Department of Justice. Later, he earned his law degree from Harvard Law School. He brings a wealth of legal experience, including working as a litigator in private practice and with the Westchester County Law Department. He's also a co-founder of the nonprofit Rising Leaders Incorporated, which teaches professional skills to underserved middle school students in 3 American cities. Deborah Ross is beginning her first term representing North Carolina's 2nd Congressional District. She also brings significant legal experience, both in private practice and as a leading civil rights attorney. She graduated college from Brown University and earned her law degree from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Congresswoman Ross entered public service in 2002 when she joined the North Carolina House of Representatives, where she served for over 10 years, including as chair of that chamber's Judiciary Committee. Cori Bush is serving in her first term, representing Missouri's 1st Congressional District. She has taken on a variety of roles in her career, including as a registered nurse, a community activist and organizer, and an ordained pastor. Congresswoman Bush studied at Harris Stowe State University before receiving a nursing degree from the Lutheran School of Nursing. In 2014, following the tragic death of Michael Brown Jr. at the hands of a Ferguson, Missouri police officer, Congresswoman Bush stood on the front lines of the ensuing protests, and she has since become an important voice in the movement for Black lives. I now yield to the ranking member, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for any opening comments he may have, and to introduce the new members on his side of the aisle.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the House Judiciary Committee is charged with tackling some of the most pressing issues facing our great nation. We have a number of challenges: reining in government surveillance, securing the border, protecting the Second Amendment, defending the unborn, strengthening our intellectual property rights, and that's just the beginning of a long list of matters the American people have entrusted to the jurisdiction of this committee. This committee is the first line of defense in protecting the document that is so critical to a healthy culture, to a healthy country, the United States Constitution. And when there are constitutional concerns, it is this committee that has to take action. And today, there's no greater threat to our constitutional rights than the attack on free speech. Cancel culture is dangerous, and unfortunately, it is sweeping the country. It's in our schools, college campuses, corporations, in the media, and even here in the United States Congress. I've said this in this committee before. No one is safe. No one is safe from the cancel culture. Look at New York Times editor Barry Weiss, not a conservative, what she said when she resigned. Look at NFL quarterback Drew Brees, the trouble he got into for simply saying you should stand for the anthem. No one is safe. 3 weeks ago on the House floor, we were debating important issue on the House floor. Said to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, the cancel culture won't just come for Republicans. It'll come for all of us. It took all of 13 days for that statement to be proven true. Last week, the San Francisco Board of Education said the Dianne Feinstein Elementary School will no longer be named after Senator Feinstein. Even a liberal icon who spent so much time in the United States Senate from the great state of California is not woke enough for the mob. Every single American should be concerned, regardless of party, regardless of ideology. It's about the First Amendment. It's about protecting the First Amendment, because you don't have a functioning First Amendment when some people in our country are not allowed to speak. We need to examine this and understand this phenomenon with hearings and figure out how to recommit America to the principles of our First Amendment. Mr. Chairman, I would also add that I'm sure I speak for all my Republican colleagues. I look forward to doing the constructive work that you talked about in your opening statement, and we appreciate those words, and do it on behalf of all the American people. And I hope the majority will live by President Biden's promise for unity and healing, and that you will be committed to working collaboratively with Republicans, as you said. We stand ready to do that. So I look forward to the discussion on the rules this morning, and I would like to welcome all the new members, the returning members, as well as our newest members, the 3 Democrat members that you introduced, Congresswoman Bush, Congresswoman Ross, and Congressman Jones. And it's also my honor to introduce 9 new Republican members of the committee. And I'll start with one that many of you know. Congressman Darrell Issa is back with us, former senior member of the House Judiciary Committee and former chair of the House Oversight Committee. Comes back to us from California's 50th District. As many of you know, prior to serving in Congress, Mr. Issa was a commissioned Army officer, an inventor with over 24 patents, and the CEO of the nation's largest manufacturer of vehicle anti-theft devices. Darrell will be ranking member of the Subcommittee on Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet. Thomas Massey has served the 4th District of Kentucky for 8 years, and I'm excited to finally have him here on the House Judiciary Committee. He received an engineering bachelor's and master's degree from MIT and holds upwards of 30 patents. Thomas founded Sense Able Technologies, which developed technology that is used for everything from designing automobiles to reconstructive implants for America's military. Prior to coming to Congress, Thomas was judge executive for Lewis County in the great state of Kentucky. We're also happy to have Mr. Chip Roy, and I don't see Chip here, on the committee. Chip is no stranger to judiciary issues. He was a senior counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee, chief of staff to Senator Ted Cruz, and staff director for Senator Cornyn. He represents the 21st District of Texas. Chip graduated from the University of Virginia and the University of Texas Law School and was the first assistant attorney general under Ken Paxton and senior advisor to Governor Rick Perry. Dan Bishop comes to the committee from the 9th District of North Carolina. He received both his bachelor's and law degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and was a commercial litigator in the state for 29 years. He served in the North Carolina House of Representatives and Senate until he was elected to Congress in 2019. Michelle Fishbaugh represents the Minnesota's 7th District. She graduated from St. Cloud University and received her law degree from William Mitchell College of Law. Michelle served in the Minnesota Senate for 20 years, including 4 years as the Senate president, and also served as her state's lieutenant governor. Victoria Spartz knows firsthand the darkness of living under socialism. Having been born in the Soviet Republic and coming to the United States in her 20s, she has a bachelor's degree from an MBA from the National University of Economics in Ukraine and a Master of Accounting from the Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. Victoria spent her career as an auditor for a Big Four accounting firm and served in the Indiana State Senate before coming to Congress to represent the 5th District of her state. Burgess Owens joins us from Utah's 4th District. He graduated from the University of Miami, went on to have a decade-long career in the NFL. He was a first-round draft pick for the New York Jets and starting safety for the Oakland Raiders when they were Super Bowl champs in 1980. He is a founder of Second Chance for Growth, a nonprofit dedicated to helping at-risk and incarcerated youth. Scott Fitzgerald comes to us from Wisconsin's 5th District. Prior to coming to Congress, he was a Wisconsin state senator for 16 years, served in the United States Army Reserve for 27 years, retiring lieutenant colonel. Scott graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. It's not Madison, but it's close, where I went to school. He spent a decade in publishing in Wisconsin, where he owned the Dodge County Independent News and worked for the Watertown Daily Times. And finally, we welcome Cliff Bentz to the committee as well. Cliff was raised on a ranch in Eastern Oregon, now represents Oregon's 2nd District. He graduated from Eastern Oregon State University, received his law degree from Lewis and Clark Law School, went on to practice law in the Oregon State House and Senate for 14 years before coming to Congress. Again, we want to welcome all our new members, our returning members from both sides of the aisle. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member for his comments, and I ask everyone to join me in welcoming all of the new members of the committee. The next order of business is adoption of the committee rules for the 117th Congress as required by Clause 2A of House Rule 11. A copy of the proposed rules has been shared with each member. Let me briefly summarize how these rules differ from those from the last Congress. The primary change we have made is to replace the gender-specific word chairman with the gender-neutral chair. This change is consistent with the new House rules, which have also been modernized to be more gender-inclusive. The other change will conform our rules with the new House rule requiring greater transparency with respect to amendments offered at markup. It requires that the text of all amendments that are not adopted or that are withdrawn at a markup be posted electronically within 48 hours after the markup is concluded. Previously, only amendments that were adopted were required to be posted. This will not change our current practice, which is to post all of the amendments that were considered, but it is important to harmonize our committee rules with the House rules. Overall, these committee rule changes are very modest in scope, and I urge their adoption. I also want to describe the steps this committee is going to take to protect the health and safety of committee members and staff. While vaccinations have thankfully begun, our country is still experiencing tens of thousands of new cases of the coronavirus every day, and the virus continues to kill nearly 2,000 Americans a day. In view of these numbers, and following the advice of healthcare experts, on the first day of the 117th Congress, the Speaker declared a public health emergency, which means the House is in a covered period and is following special procedures to mitigate risks presented by the virus. As I stated multiple times during the 116th Congress, I view the wearing of masks and maintaining social distancing as an important matter of order and decorum. To fulfill my responsibility as chair of this committee to protect your health and safety, I am requiring members and staff to wear face masks at all times they are in physical attendance at committee proceedings. And following the Speaker's announcement on January 4th, I am also requiring members to keep their masks on even when you are under recognition. I recognize this is a change in policy from the last Congress, but I view it as necessary given the current state of the pandemic. For the health and safety of everyone in this room and of our families and neighbors, these rules will be strictly enforced to the fullest extent permitted under the rules. At a minimum, if necessary, I will exercise my discretion as chair not to recognize a member who does not comply with these rules. As always, members who do not wish to wear masks are welcome to participate in our proceedings remotely. I now yield to the gentleman from Ohio for any remarks that he may have about the rules.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that, and I think the chairman has characterized it exactly right. Modest changes, and I think we're comfortable with where you're going with the rules. And I do appreciate the fact that we are having a hybrid hearing. Some of the other committees do not do it this way. I think it's much better for us, particularly this committee, as I said in my opening comments, which is charged with defending the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and those fundamental liberties that our great country, citizens of our great country enjoy. I think it's great when we can be in person and the witnesses could be here. So I appreciate the chairman's willingness to do the hybrid setup and follow the protocols that the House position has encouraged us to follow. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. Are there any amendments to the committee rules?
Mr. Chairman?
Who seeks recognition? Mr. Gates.
I have an
For
amendment
what
at the
purpose
desk.
does the gentleman seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the Rules of Procedure offered by Mr. Gates of Florida. In Rule 2, renumber clauses B.
Mr.
through-
Chairman, I reserve a point of order. Point of order is reserved.
B through 1 as clauses C through M, and after Clause A, insert the following. B, at the start of each meeting, the chairman or the chairman's designee shall lead the committee in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag in accordance with Section 4 of Title 4 of the U.S. Code.
The gentleman is recognized to speak in his amendment for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to extend a welcome to the new committee members. I'm grateful to be back on this august committee, and I understand and appreciate the significance and importance of the work that we do. And I just think it would be nice if, in the spirit of national unity and national pride, which I know we all aspire to do to a greater extent, that at the beginning of each meeting, the chair or one of the designees of the chair would have the opportunity to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. We're all aware that in these times, it's important for the country to see members of Congress working together on some things. And while I know that we can deal with divisive issues in the committee, it would be my hope that we could start every committee with a great unifying patriotic moment. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I recognize myself to speak in opposition to the amendment. It's unnecessary. The House begins every day with the Pledge of Allegiance. We're covered by that. There's no necessity to say the Pledge of Allegiance twice during the same day. So it's not been our practice to do so. I appreciate the gentleman's suggestion, but we are covered by the House, which we all say the Pledge of Allegiance every day.
Mr. Chairman.
So I oppose the amendment. Does anyone else seek recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized.
Sorry about that. Thank you for the recognition. I want to speak in favor of Mr. Gates' amendment. I think it's a simple one. I think it's important symbolism right now. Look, we all know, and it's been discussed already today, that our nation is divided. I mean, many of us have talked frankly about this individually. We're more divided now, arguably, than we have been since maybe the era of the Civil War. And there are a few things left in our culture, in our society, that unite us. The Pledge of Allegiance is one of those things. It's been part of our tradition in this country since 1892. It's an important institution that we have. Every school child in America still, I think, recites it in the mornings before they begin their classes. And it's one of those things that verbalizes, in just 15 seconds, it won't take a lot of our time, but it verbalizes the things that unify us, the principles that make us the great flourishing republic that we are. And I think it would be a good unifying exercise and experience for us. And so for that reason, it's, I guess, insinuated or implied that it would somehow be a waste of time because there's a pledge on the floor at the opening of the floor proceedings. But what we do here is separate and apart and different. And when we join together, especially because of how you articulated that this is an important committee that should be productive, we have a lot of bipartisan important jurisdiction and work to do here, I think that would be a great way for us to do that and share in that great exercise and symbolize it for everybody watching at home. So I see no harm in it. It will only cost us 15 seconds, and for that reason, I urge my colleagues to support it.
For what purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
I mean, if the objective is unity, then maybe we can all go to the floor when the House opens every day, and the whole judiciary, the whole Congress could be there. So, you know, I don't think we need to repeat it here. So happy to join you on the floor.
Would Gentlelady yield? Would,
Gentlelady yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition? Mr.
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
I yield to my friend from Louisiana.
oh, I just wanted to reply, I mean, that respectfully, that would be great if we could assemble this big group of people every morning on the floor, but we know because of the busy nature of our schedules, rarely are we all there. I've been there for the opening prayer a number of times and haven't seen maybe any members of this committee, and it's not because you don't believe in the opening exercise, it's because your schedule is too full usually in the morning to be there. So that would be great, but we all know the reality is that won't happen. So because of that, why not do it here? I just don't understand the opposition to it. It would be a great tradition, and we might inspire other committees to do the same. And again, it's not political. It's apolitical by definition, and I think it would be a good thing for us to do. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Well, it's my time, actually, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I appreciate the gentleman's remarks, and I support the gentleman from Florida's a fine example in this case. As many of my colleagues, were present for the president's inaugural statements, and I was touched deeply by his, at the moment, call for unity. And I think that there is nothing more unifying than all of us saying the Pledge of Allegiance together, and also the symbol that it sends to the country. The idea that Democrats and Republicans can stand together, acknowledge the flag, acknowledge how we are a country that has grown up under certain values that we share together. And Mr. Chairman, I think it is so essential that that message is sent so that others in this country can come together, identifying the flag, identifying our common values, and putting our differences aside. And so I think the gentleman from Florida has a great idea, and I hope that the majority will agree to accept that fine idea. Anybody else want to speak?
Does anyone else seek recognition?
Chairman,
I yield back. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
strike the last word.
A gentlelady seek recognition.
Strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Let me congratulate all of the new members who've come to this committee and reinforce what Chairman Nadler and Ranking Member Jordan have offered, that this is a very important committee, and we are the holders and the protectors of the Constitution. And I look forward to working with my colleagues going throughout their tenure on this committee to protect the Constitution and the values of that Constitution. With that in mind, the House of Representatives, as have already been said, does not miss a day when we do not stand and pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And as we do that, we set the tone for every single committee and every single action that we do on that day. I feel the weight of the flag, and no matter what committee I happen to be in. And as I sought to look at the various word changes of the flag's pledge, or the pledge to the flag, I'm reminded one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And what I think will be most important for this committee, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member and to members, is that our actions as we proceed throughout this session of Congress will continue to represent with liberty and justice for all. That is the true testament to our commitment to the pledge and to the words that we say on behalf of our commitment to this nation, to patriotism, and to this constitutional document. So, Mr. Chairman, I believe that, as we often say, precedent has already been set. We say the flag or pledge to the flag every morning, and I think that pledge dictates that we do more than pledge, that we use our deeds to reflect the message, the spirit, and the words of that. With that in mind, I would suggest the gentleman join us in our actions and deeds to reflect the mission and message of the flag, and would not oppose his particular spirit and thought of his amendment, but I would say to him that precedent has been set, and it's already occurs and has occurred, and therefore we can operate that way in this committee, knowing that the pledge has already been said at the beginning of every session. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to commend the gentleman from Florida for offering this amendment, which I really do think ought to be a unifying amendment, something that would bring us all together, I believe. And you, Mr. Chairman, you said it's unnecessary, but, and yes, we do pledge the flag on the floor, but this committee in particular, I think when you think about the issues that we deal with, for 6 years of my life, I was the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee's Constitution Subcommittee, and you were the ranking member of that committee, and we spent 6 years doing important things, defending the Constitution, our freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. We dealt with heady issues, important things like reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act, which we did in a bipartisan manner. Now, unfortunately, in this committee, this tends to be one of the least bipartisan committees, the overall committee in many respects. Whenever there's an amendment offered by usually by the minority, too often it's all Republicans voting one way and all Democrats voting the other way. But I think pledging allegiance to the flag of the country that we all cherish and care for is something that ought to unify us and bring us together. So I would strongly encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote for this, I think, very fine gesture to pledge to our flag. So I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question occurs on the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I thought I was going to Democrats.
Sorry, who seeks recognition?
Right here, Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose?
I move to strike the last word, and I support the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We got athletes who won't stand for the national anthem. We got a new administration that canceled the 1776 commission. Some of the athletes who won't stand for the national anthem actually play for Team USA and won't stand for the national anthem. The new administration, as I said, cancels the 1776 commission, which talks about the evils of fascism and communism, the importance of the nuclear family, and those principles that make our country special. It would seem to me maybe the committee charged with the committee that has this storied history of protecting the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. One thing we could show to the country, as the gentleman from Florida mentioned in his opening remarks, is we're going to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and defend liberty and justice for all. So this is as simple as it gets. As I think the gentleman from Colorado said, it's 15 seconds. 15 seconds. I think we just should support this and show the country that we can be unified in the committee that's charged with protecting the Constitution and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I just think it's a good symbol, a good sign, and would hope that the majority would adopt the gentleman from Florida's amendment. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, this is Representative Bass.
For what
Can I say
purpose
something?
does the gentlelady seek recognition?
Well, a couple of things. I think in the rules, you also mentioned that we are required to wear masks. Now, obviously, I'm in my office, but it is my understanding that the proper way to wear a mask is that your mouth is covered and your nose, since COVID is spread through nasal secretions. So I would just encourage all my colleagues to please wear your mask and do it properly.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady's point is well taken.
I'm not finished.
Sorry.
The other thing is that I just wanted to make a suggestion around the amendment. I know that there is no one on this committee that does not agree that saying the Pledge of Allegiance is a very unifying thing that we do in this country, a part of our tradition and part of our culture. And so I just wanted to recommend that maybe what my colleagues could do, those that are interested in saying the pledge in the committee, why don't you just arrive at the committee a few minutes later and you all stand and have the pledge? We don't need an amendment for that. It doesn't need to be a part of the rules. I think you're welcome to say the pledge at any point in time, any day, time of day, whenever you would like. And a group of you can certainly do that. And maybe if I'm there early, I'll stand and join you. Thank you. I yield.
Gentlelady yields back.
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does Mr. Roy seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. we've already noted that we're talking about 15 seconds. We're talking about the flag of the United States of America. It would strike me, I've heard the arguments that the esteemed gentlelady from Texas made about the fact that we meet as a body on the House floor and the pledge is said on the floor of the House. I mean, I'd take an informal poll. I don't think it's probably within the rules to do so, but I mean, how many members of this committee have been on the floor of the House when the pledge was said? No. I mean, today or yesterday or last week, the previous week. I mean, the fact of the matter is we all know there's a handful of members of this body that are on the floor at the time when it opens every day. When I've been on the floor, there's been 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, not 435. And I can assure you that while the vast majority of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are voting by proxy, sometimes sitting on a boat in Florida, that they're not doing the Pledge of Allegiance on the floor of the House of Representatives. When I'm sitting down on the floor of the House of Representatives, as I just was, and we were having to wait to finish a vote because people are voting by proxy and they're not here, and then we have people who are voting by proxy telling us about how we need to operate with masks and fences and razor wire, spare me. I think the point of being able to have the Pledge of Allegiance said here in this committee when we meet and when we do our job, when we should all be physically here meeting, is actually fundamentally important. It is just the same as when we were in school and we were in class and we came in together and there was 30 or 40 of us and we were looking up at the flag of the United States, standing together and pledging allegiance to the United States. That's what I think is important. I mean, that's what matters, right? I'm fundamentally just disappointed we never get together, debate, engage, and vote. Yesterday on the floor, as we're dealing with the budget resolution, I pointed out, and I had a great exchange with the distinguished majority leader, that we need to actually have debate, right? Instead of passing $2 trillion bills without even having as much as a single amendment being able to be offered on the floor of the House of Representatives. This is not the people's house.
As soon as he finishes talking.
And the point of this resolution being offered from the gentleman from Florida is for us to be able to come together and recognize our common bond under the flag of the United States. And I support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yield back.
Mr. Chairman?
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
For what
Mr.
purpose
Chairman.
is Mr. Nagu seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would just simply say I certainly appreciate the gentleman from Florida in terms of the amendment that he has proposed to the rules. I take great pride in saying the pledge and every opportunity that I have to be on the floor as we begin the day's proceedings in that regard. Irrespective of this particular amendment, I guess one suggestion I would have for the gentleman, and certainly something I'd be willing to work with him on, is a standardized approach across all committees. And perhaps that's a discussion that could be had with respect to amending the rules of the House so that the pledge can be said at every official committee proceeding, not just one committee. So that's certainly something that I would be supportive of working with the gentleman on. And with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Back. Say it now.
Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me. One vote has been called on the House floor. This committee will stand in recess. I would hope the members would go vote and come back immediately. We will recess now so members can go vote. The committee stands in recess.
Can anybody hear me? Zoe, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We can hear you, Steve. I can too. Democrats or everybody on this when you talking now?
So right now, everyone's mic is hot and it is broadcasting online through YouTube. So just be keeping that in mind.
Okay, well, I missed a little bit of what we just had. I wake up in the morning and I pledge allegiance to the flag. I go outside regardless of the weather where I've got my flag up by my house and I pledge allegiance, and then I get on my knees and I pray. If I do that, am I supposed to do it again, and how many times a day should I do that?
I think you should do it at least every hour.
Hourly, right?
Yeah,
Maybe in front of the, in the Rayburn Horseshoe.
I think so.
Yeah. So what do they want? They want prayer said before the beginning of each meeting and the pledge, or just the pledge?
Just the pledge.
Just the pledge.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first grade, we had something like this.
I remember too. I remember on Fridays at 10 o'clock, we ducked below our desks because of a nuclear bomb.
Right, duck and cover.
That ages me, right? I'm going to vote.
Well, Pramila, you should do something about this as head of the CPC. I charge you with the responsibility.
Just what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Jesus Christ.
The committee will come to order. When we recessed for the vote on the floor, we were debating the Gates Amendment. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Deming, seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. You know, I have to say that I was really encouraged in this first meeting of our new committee by your opening remarks, Mr. Chairman, and also the opening remarks from the ranking member. I really thought that maybe this time, that this cycle, we would begin really being serious about the critical work that this committee has to do. I thought perhaps without the obstructor-in-chief in office, that maybe we really put this work first and the American people. But sadly today, I have to acknowledge that I was wrong. I love the Pledge of Allegiance. See, it really means something to me when I listen to the words about my upbringing and all in the South and the obstacles and challenges. When I hear words like one nation, that means something to me. When I hear words like justice for all, not just some, not just for the privileged few, but justice for all, believe me, those words mean everything to me. They're beautiful, but words only come to life when we put them into practice. My husband likes to say you can make your mouth say anything. And boy, in my 2 terms, now my 3rd term in Congress, boy, that's certainly the truth. But while we are playing political games, there are people in this country who are suffering. And today we are having this debate. Words mean nothing without action. Faith without works is dead. We also, Mr. Chairman, as you know, we all took an oath. I've taken 5 now. I took them all very seriously to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But on January 6th, we were trying to fulfill our constitutional duties and watch the peaceful transfer of power. People in this room who are now fighting so hard that we stand up and say the pledge, voted to overturn a free and fair election. Same people in this room, when there was a breach at the U.S. Capitol, the most sacred, iconic building of what a democracy is supposed to look like, represent. When the breach was occurring at the Capitol and the Capitol Police were fighting for their very lives. We know one died. We've honored him this week. We need to continue to honor him. Others received great bodily harm. People who are now talking about the words that we say were silent and did nothing. Your oath means nothing if you don't practice what you preach. And for me and my place on this committee, I'd rather see a sermon every day than just simply hear one. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
For what purpose does Ms. Sparks seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I actually did vote with a lot of your some Republican colleagues and your Democrat colleagues to certify the election. But I would like to ask you for a favor. This is a simple but, a powerful gesture of collaboration to set the right tone. I served in the Indiana State Senate in supermajority. We didn't have to take any Democrat amendments, but we did. I personally took amendments in my bills, and we might have a lot of debate, and this committee will have a vibrant debate, which is great. That's part of the process. But if we can agree on some issues, and I didn't see any disagreement, let's just set the tone of collaboration and vote on some of the issues that we agree on. So I really hope my Democrat colleagues would actually vote on this amendment, which is very simple but very important gesture, and not vote no just because it's a Republican amendment. I think it will be a great start of this session, and I look forward to working with everyone. I yield back.
For what purpose does Ms. Bush seek recognition? You may need to unmute your mic.
Did you call my name, Mr. Chairman? I'm sorry, I can't really hear.
Ms. Bush, I called your name. For what purpose do you seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to put it out there. We're talking about unity, and we're talking about making sure that this is something that is supposed to bring everyone together. When in actuality, we have to look at what unity really means. And when we talk about the Pledge of Allegiance, pledging to a flag. We all want to be able to look at that and say, yes, that is my flag. Yes, this is my country. And I feel like that this thing is equal and it represents me the same. But we all know that that is not what's happening right now. And so if we are not able to recognize that, because when we talk about athletes kneeling, athletes were kneeling because they want the flag to represent them the same. They want that those dead bodies of people that look like me to actually mean something that when it relates to police violence. They want that to stop. That's why people kneel. That's why we kneel. So when we talk about the Pledge of Allegiance, we should all want the same things. But right now, because white supremacy is so rampant in this country, let us not think that simply pledging to a flag is going to fix it. And so what I ask is that we fix the white supremacy that even exists here and deal with that first before we think about making it mandatory that unity comes by speaking the Pledge of Allegiance. We get that every single day. And so with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does Mr. Owen seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized.
Okay, how's that? I was blessed to grow up in the Deep South, 60s, days of KKK, Jim Crow, segregation. I say blessed because I grew up in a community that believed in our nation, believed in God, believed in their kids, and they were going to fight to prove they could overcome any obstacle. It was a great community that taught us the importance of a flag. It taught us to love God, country, family, respect for women, and authority. And you know the results of that many of you don't know about? In 1960, it was a black community that led our country to growth in the middle class. The black community that led our country, men matriculated from college, men committed to marriage, over 70%. Percentage of entrepreneurs, over 40%. Why were we kicking butt in those days, like every other community that was not assimilated at that time? We loved our country. We believed in meritocracy. We taught our kids to stand for that flag and for what it represented. Not perfect, but the best thing in the history of mankind. I went to the University of Miami, the third black to get a scholarship, graduated in biology and chemistry. Why? Because of my segregated community, we were committed to education. I would go to my dad's laboratory every summer and work. And when a white guy told me I couldn't do it, I spent the next 4 years in college living in that library to prove him wrong. Because my race, like every other race, looked at this country as a place of second chances, of opportunity, and big dreams. Went into NFL in 1973. No black centers, no black quarterbacks, no black linebackers, no black middle linebackers. Why? Because those are white thinking positions. $50,000 as a bonus as a first-round draft choice. We have guys making $50 million today to play any position they want to, will not stand for the flag because they've been taught by their adults not to love our nation. What can we do here as leaders, guys? Let's put aside the partisanship, appreciate the fact that we have a body here of every color under the rainbow, every background. Across this country, we have black police officers, black mayors. You know, as we have more and more freedom to achieve our dreams, we seem to point more and more at other people for the failures that we have when we make bad decisions. What is my message, guys? I'm going to follow what Congressman Lee says. It's not about words. It is about actions. 15 seconds to show our kids that we're adults, that we can agree to disagree, but we love our country enough to at least stand and represent our flag. For a young man in 73 to 83 to stand on that sideline and get teary-eyed because our flag was flying, we've lost that. We're teaching our kids, any mistake you make is somebody else's fault. That is not the way our country rolls, guys. We gotta do better than that. Why don't we start off just by one simple action? We talk about actions, one simple action. As leaders, let's stand, let's pledge our flag and say thank you for this opportunity to represent the people we're sent here to represent. And that we will be the example of what unity looks like, not just a word. We'll act by saying the words that bring our country together, putting our hands on our hearts and meaning it, and showing everyone, doesn't matter what side of the aisle we're on, this is one thing we can agree on. I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield? Gentleman yield?
Well, no.
Oh, I thank the distinguished chair for this opportunity. I move to strike the last word. I was hoping to engage with the new distinguished gentleman from Utah as he sat here lecturing us about patriotism, and I was just going to ask him how he voted after a violent mob attacked the Capitol to hunt down members of Congress, to hang Mike Pence, to assassinate Nancy Pelosi, to stop us from undertaking our constitutional responsibilities as part of the peaceful transfer of power. More than 100 officers seriously injured, brain injuries, head trauma. One officer lost 3 fingers. Another officer, because of an assault on him, is likely to be blind. Officer Sicknick died. Blood was spilled. 2 other officers are no longer with us. And you want to sit here and lecture us about patriotism when you voted to object to an election that you know Joe Biden won and perpetrated the big lie? I look forward to working with you. We worked with Donald Trump on criminal justice reform, the First Step Act. We worked with Donald Trump on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, his signature political issue. When you know if you were in the other position, you would have never worked with a Democratic president on their signature political issue, trade. But we did it because it was the right thing for America. So we're going to work with Republicans whenever and wherever possible. We did it with Donald Trump. But the notion of you coming here lecturing us on your first day before this committee, it's not about words, it's about actions. You know what? Explain your actions on January 7th when you supported an insurrection. And I was ready to have a dialogue.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I believe the gentleman should address his comments to the chair.
The gentleman will address his comments to the chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I was happy to have a dialogue with the distinguished.
Can I answer that? Will you yield?
No. I gave him. It's my time.
The gentleman from New York has the floor.
And you don't really want any of this either.
It's his time now.
But
Will the gentleman yield?
I gave him an opportunity to yield.
Will the gentleman yield to anybody else?
He chose not to.
Apparently not.
So I'm going to finish my statement, and then I'll give you an opportunity to respond.
All right.
But you said it was not about words, it's about actions. Those actions, Mr. Chairman, in my view, were unpatriotic to provide aid and comfort to what Republicans in many parts of the country have characterized as a violent insurrection incited by the former president of the United States of America. You also said that any mistake is not your fault in terms of what's being taught to others. That's what the former president of the United States peddled for 4 years. He took no responsibility for anything. And Mr. Chairman, there's some members on the other side of the aisle, including perhaps former NFL players, who defended that kind of irresponsible behavior. So it's just hard to be lectured here, given the actions that have been taken. And I would just hope that we're going to proceed with some measure of truth, decency, and intellectual integrity as we make our arguments, even though we know we're going to fiercely disagree, as has been in the case in the past. I'm happy to yield.
Okay. Was it insurrection when in 2016, 7 of your colleagues objected? Was it insurrection for the last 3 Republican wins, presidential wins that they objected? No, it was not. It was a voice. It was having the people realize you had some concerns. Now, in terms of—
Thank you. Reclaiming my time, you asked the question. I would just simply say, and the impeachment managers are going to do a great job, but a violent insurrection resulted in the spilling of American blood. People died. The Capitol was desecrated. Urine and feces was left behind. The Confederate flag was bandied about. That didn't even happen in this Capitol during the Civil War. The Trump flag was placed in the stead of the American flag. That's an insurrection. That's sedition. That's undemocratic. That's problematic. And the American thing to do is to stand up to it. I yield back.
Okay. Will you yield?
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does Mr. Issa seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized.
Microphone.
You can tell I've been gone. Mr. Chairman, it's good to be back. The last time I was here, you and I—
Good to have you back.
Thank you. You know, the last time you and I were together, we were working together from a different role, but as co-sponsors of legislation. And it seems like an eternity ago, but I really was gone for just 2 years. And so I'm going to speak a little bit as one of the longest-serving members on our side of the aisle. I'm hearing what people are talking about, and it reminds me how far we've gone from our own history. After 9/11, Barney Frank and Darrell Issa, as a freshman, and a bunch of other people on both sides of the aisle met with the ACLU and the NRA to try to figure out how to fix the Patriot Act. We failed, by the way, and we got rolled on the floor, and this committee has had to fix it each time it's come up for reauthorization because it went too far on our liberties after an attack on our nation. 9/11 created a great deal of unity in this body that I'm afraid January 6th has undone beyond some fixing. But at least I won't lecture anyone, but I'll give you my own pledge. And I'll take my own pledge from the late Antonin Scalia, who famously said, "I attack ideas, I don't attack people." He did go on to say, and some very good people have some very bad ideas. I'm sure there will be bad ideas from our side of the aisle, and at times it just might be a bad idea or an idea that can be improved by your side of the aisle. I can only say that I've come back to this committee and I've come back to Congress with a dedication to do the best I can. I voted in a way that you didn't approve on January 6th. I voted again that way on impeachment. And I've got to tell you, I soul searched before the votes, and I continue to second guess myself after the votes on every one of them. And we can have a debate, and I'm sure we will, about 2005, 2017, all the times that each side has done something similar. What I hope we won't debate is the trauma that members of both parties went through when people who meant harm to our Constitution, to our republic, broke in. And it didn't matter whether they were going after the Republican vice president or the Democratic Speaker of the House. We as a body, I believe, should be united, and we should continue not to disparage the other person as though we were not genuinely impacted, regardless of our vote. Because I, for one, can tell you that I will never forget that day. It will be burned in my memory, and it will affect how I view defending the Constitution more than even the attacks of 9/11. And, you know, there are many members on your side of the aisle, and I'm sure some on our side of the aisle, that we're going to have to give them the comfort that we are willing to work together and show the insurrectionist, the anarchist, no matter whether on the left or the right, that this body will not promote their view of the world. And so I'm just going to take this last half a minute or so to say, when we have this kind of debate, I personally feel like I'm fueling or participating in fueling either the left or the right, legitimizing the attacks on the other side. And again, Antonin Scalia had good friends with people that he was usually voting the opposite of and writing scathing denouncements of their opinion, but not of them as individuals. So I don't know that I can ask anyone to do anything different, but if you see me ever slip and start attacking anyone for their intent or their position based on who they are, rather than an idea and attacking it because I don't happen to think it's correct, call me out on it, because my intention is to respect everyone here, especially my friend, the chairman, because I've known him and some of you, I've known that you're good people, good families, and you care. And I'll close with Ronald Reagan's famous statement, which he was a former Democrat, but he used to say, liberals aren't stupid, they just know things that aren't true. Well, that's kind of a euphemism that you can turn around and say, you know what, conservatives can be wrong, but we're not wrong because we're evil, we're just wrong because sometimes we're wrong. And I hope that we can return to that kind of discord rather than what I personally am going to try to stay out of. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar, seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to associate myself with the comments of my colleague, the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings, but I do want to make one correction. Actually, 3 police officers have died. 2 of them died by suicide, possibly a result of the trauma that they had to endure on January 6th. We just recessed a little while ago so we could go vote. And on my walk from my office to the Capitol, I passed by groups of soldiers who've been here since January 6th, guarding the Capitol and all of us who have the privilege to work here. As I crossed the street, I again saw the iron wall that had to be put up and the barbed wire that was put on that wall, that was put up around our temple of democracy because of the domestic terrorist attack that took place on January 6th. I was not planning on weighing in on this issue, but when I crossed that street just a little while ago, I have to say something. The big test of our unity around the flag, unity around our republic, unity around our democracy, that test happened on January 6th and in the weeks that followed. That test happened when domestic terrorists tried to replace our American flag with a Trump flag, when they paraded a Confederate flag inside the Capitol. That was the test about our allegiance to the flag. It was on January 6th. And we already know who passed that test and who failed that test. Unity is not a word, it's an act. And the dangerous false equivalency that I've heard just in these last few minutes tells me that there is still a lot for people to learn. But I'm ready to move on. We have lots of important real work to do, and the American people deserve that we give that work our focus. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Tiffany seek recognition?
To move this, to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Early in your remarks, you commented about saying the pledge twice in a day, once down on the floor when business starts for the day of this August body, and then we would be saying it again. I don't really have a problem with repetitions like that. In fact, I think back to my days when I served on a town board, little town, 200 people up in northern Wisconsin, and occasionally we would have a town board meeting, but we'd also have like committee meetings, or we'd have other meetings, and we would say the pledge sometimes multiple times a day, sometimes 2 and 3 times, and it only took a brief time, and no one objected to that, and I don't see any reason why we would object to that, doing that now. In regards to the comments from the gentleman from New York about not being lectured, I really heard the gentleman from Utah's words in a much different way, in that he was speaking of his life experience, something that we have really celebrated since the civil rights movement was so successful, culminating in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And I think about the story that he told. I did not hear that as a lecture. I really heard it as his personal story and journey here to this place, serving in the House of Representatives. I denounced what happened on January 6th, just as I denounced what happened this summer in places like my home state, where in Madison, Wisconsin, a statue to a man who served in the Union Army to preserve the Union and to end slavery was torn down and thrown into the lake in Madison. I think we all need to denounce whenever we see this happen, regardless of what side of the political aisle we think people are coming from. And you speak of hearing or of seeing urine and feces in this Capitol. My colleague, who has just joined us here on the Judiciary Committee and joined the House of Representatives from Wisconsin, he can speak of that because it's 10 years ago. We're in February right now. 10 years ago, this month, that we saw a dramatic change in public policy in Wisconsin, and our Capitol was under siege for days. People were urinating in that Capitol and defacing probably the most beautiful state capitol in the United States of America. We saw that. I hope that you would also denounce that, or back at that time that you did denounce that. Because regardless of when it happens or who we perceive this is being precipitated by, we must denounce it every single time. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Utah.
And I join in that. We've seen too much violence, death, pain, and as leaders, we need to make sure that no matter where it comes from, we denounce immediately and then take care of and deal with it. I shared something real quick with my colleagues last night. I just want to share with you guys. My perspective comes from knowing my history. My great-great-grandfather, Salisbury, just came to this country in the belly of a slave ship, escaped at age 8, made his way out to Texas, very successful entrepreneur, started the first black church, first black elementary, purchased 102 acres of land within 2 years. My grandfather, at age 15, during World War I, successful farmer, 12 kids, all of them graduated from college. My dad, successful entrepreneur. You know my dad didn't have, and neither did my other ancestors, until he was 39 years old and I was 13. It's called due process. We cannot become a body that does not give due process. And of all people, the Black community should know that better than anybody else. Mob mentality never has worked, it never will. It's unfair. And anybody get caught on the wrong side of mob mentality, council culture, we will regret that we released that beast on our nation. And no, this was not a lecture, by the way, my friend, on the other side. Seriously, it was not a lecture. It was my background. It's my passion. And I think we should all be able to agree to disagree. I know for one thing for sure, every bit of my downtimes in my lifetime, every bit of racism I grew up with when I was a kid that I no longer experience today, it's because I believe in this nation. And I've taught my kids to do the same thing. It's called the American dream. Try giving a generation not that, and you will find failure big
Time of
time.
the gentleman has expired.
I yield.
And Mr. Tiffany, New York has the most beautiful state capital in the United States. I understand that there is one more Republican member who would like to speak, and I will close the debate. And I will close the debate on the Democratic side. Then I will be prepared to call the vote. For what purpose does Mr. Stube seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't understand for the life of me what saying the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of this committee hearing has anything to do with January 6th, has anything to do with how members voted on their constitutional authority to reject or accept the elections. Democrats in this committee raised objections in 2017 to Trump's election. Ms. Jackson Lee, Ms. Jayapal, Mr. Raskin. So were they voting to overturn a free and fair election as stated by Ms. Demings? No, they were exercising their constitutional authority that has been memorialized in our Constitution because that is their right as a member of Congress to do that. And I don't agree with it, just like you don't agree with my objection, but it's my ability as a member of Congress to do that, just like it was their ability as a member of Congress to do that. But none of this has anything to do with the Pledge of Allegiance. USMCA doesn't have anything to do with the Pledge of Allegiance. And Trump and insurrection and all this and the impeachment that's happening in the Senate, not here next week, has nothing to do with coming into this committee meeting. And what Mr. Gates has proposed is a simple amendment to the rules to allow us jointly as Republicans and Democrats to stand up together and to pledge allegiance to our flag. And all I'm hearing is all this other garbage that has nothing to do with the actual issue that we're debating right now, which is, why don't you want us to stand up and have the pledge before a meeting? Now, when they've actually addressed the issue and responding to the issue at hand, I've heard, well, we do that in the morning. How many of you were there this morning at the beginning of session to pledge allegiance? 2. Okay, not everybody, 2. So, no, I wasn't, which is the whole point. The whole point is for us as a committee, when we start, to have a Pledge of Allegiance jointly. And again, there was a Democrat that said, well, you know, we don't have to do it in the committees because they do it on the floor. Well, every committee's pass rules, and we are asking, Mr. Gates is asking, that we have a pledge. Now, I served in the state legislature for 8 years in Florida, and every chairman had the ability not only to have the pledge before meetings, and some of them did, but also to have a prayer. I mean, maybe I should file an amendment after this amendment to also have a prayer, and we can have this discussion again about having a pledge and a prayer just like we do on the floor in a meeting of a committee. And I don't understand what is all the impetus behind this. And the gentleman from New York, when I was interrupting because there was a back and forth here, he said, you don't want any of this. Like we're back in high school. And I'll contend with you that I will go toe-to-toe with you any day, any committee meeting on any issue in this chamber and in this committee. And I look forward to those debates. I look forward to us sitting here on opposite sides of the dais and actually debating policy. But if we want to be childish and just bring up stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with what we're discussing between us and what is in front of us right now. It's just a complete and utter waste of the committee's time. We've been here for now, I don't know, several hours debating Trump, the riots, all of this, just simply because Republicans want to stand up and have the pledge, and you're over there snickering and talking and having comments, and that's fine. You can be disrespectful to me while I'm talking. That's fine. You can do that. I don't do that when you're talking. But you can do that, and you can continue to do that, and you can laugh and sneer and snark, but we are being serious over here because we would like to have the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of a committee meeting. And if you don't want to vote for that, because we're going to call a vote, if you don't want to vote for that, then that's fine. You can go back to your district and you can explain to them that you voted against standing up with the Republicans at the beginning of a committee meeting and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. That's fine, and we're all going to have the opportunity to vote for that. I certainly look forward to going back to my district and explaining to them, well, we tried to have, just a simple gesture in this committee to have the Pledge of Allegiance. It's a very simple thing. I don't even understand why there's debate against this. It's the pledge to our nation, and all of this debate and debauchery and name calling and you don't want any of this, like we're back in grade school, is ridiculous. So if you don't want to say the pledge, then you don't have to. You can vote no. And I know what the makeup is of this committee, and we're probably going to lose this motion. But I think the American people need to know that you're not willing to stand up in this committee before this committee starts and pledge allegiance to our nation's flag. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields
Mr.
back.
Chairman,
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word, and I yield to the chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
And I yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I want to say that I appreciate the sentiments of Mr. Gates in offering his amendment. However, I would make several observations. First, as has been frequently stated by the members, the pledge is recited every day we are in session on the House floor. I understand that many members are not on the floor at that time, just as many members are not in attendance at the beginning of every Judiciary Committee markup. But for those who want to recite the pledge, that is the best and most important opportunity to do so. Second, my friends on the other side of the aisle have been in the majority for 20 of the last 26 years in the House, and they were free at any time to provide for such a rule under Chairman Hyde, under Chairman Sensenbrenner, under Chairman Smith, and under Chairman Goodlatte. Yet this was never suggested during consideration of any of those committee rules packages. Third, I believe the minority has been in receipt of the proposed rules for almost a week. We have had many fruitful discussions concerning the ratios, the rules, and how they operate. This proposal was never raised or suggested. If a member of either party is serious about obtaining bipartisan support for this or any other amendment, I would suggest that they share a copy with us in advance so we can review and discuss and perfect where necessary. Again, that has not happened here. It was not pre-filed. The first time we saw the amendment was after our meeting had begun when the amendment was offered. Fourth, in terms of drafting, I would note as an initial matter that the amendment appears to apply only to the full committee, not to subcommittees, and also applies only to meetings, not hearings. It is not clear to me if that limited scope was intentional or not. Fourth, I would say that Representative Bass also had an interesting suggestion, that those members who wish to recite the pledge could do so a few minutes before the scheduled start of any committee meeting. The room is ordinarily empty, and that could after all be a more workable and flexible suggestion. Finally, the rules can be amended at any time in the future. I would therefore ask that if my friend from Florida is truly interested in developing a bipartisan proposal, that he withdraw his amendment and that I be permitted to discuss this matter with Ranking Member Jordan and others so that this issue could be considered after more thoughtful consideration and discussion. Would the gentleman like to withdraw the amendment in that context?
I thank the chairman for yielding. I'm hopeful, regardless of how this concludes, that we would be able to facilitate what the chairman has asked for. But given the fact that this amendment was offered friendly and in good faith, and given the fact that we were called insurrectionists and white supremacists for offering it, I prefer a vote today. But I hope that doesn't preclude further negotiations, which I know the chairman offers in good faith.
In that case, I yield back. The question occurs on the amendment. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, nay. Nay.
I'd like to request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren?
No.
Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson Lee? No. Ms. Jackson Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen?
I vote no.
Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
Johnson votes no.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Deutsch? Ms. Bass? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Jeffries votes no. Mr. Cicilline? Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell?
No.
Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Liu?
No.
Mr. Liu votes no. Mr. Raskin? Ms. Jayapal?
No.
Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Demings? Ms. Demings votes no. Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes no. Ms. Garcia?
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Nagoofs? Ms. McBath?
No.
Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Stanton? Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean?
No.
Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Escobar?
No.
Ms. Escobar votes no. Mr. Jones? Mr. Jones votes no. Ms. Ross?
No.
Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Bush? Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. Gomert? Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes aye. Mr. Buck?
Aye.
Mr. Buck votes aye. Mr. Gates?
Aye.
Mr. Gates votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Aye. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Biggs? Mr. McClintock? Aye. Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Stubbe? Yes. Mr. Stubbe votes yes. Mr. Tiffany? Aye. Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey? Yes. Mr. Massey votes yes. Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Aye. Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Fishbach? Aye. Ms. Fishbach votes aye. Ms. Sparts? Mr. Fitzgerald? Aye. Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Bentz? Aye. Mr. Bentz votes aye. Mr. Owens? Yes. Mr. Owens votes yes.
Mr. Raskin?
Votes no.
Mr.
Raskin
Raskin votes no.
Has Mr. Roy voted?
Mr. Roy votes aye.
Are there any other members who wish to vote who haven't been recorded? The clerk will announce the result.
Mr. Chairman, there are 16 ayes and 21 noes.
The amendment is not adopted. Are there any further amendments? Seeing none?
Mr. Chairman, we have, I think, two more amendments. I have an amendment at desk. You next?
Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman is recognized.
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to Rules of Procedure offered by Mr. Buck of Colorado. After Rule 10, insert the following. Rule 11, gender inclusive language. Consistent with Section 2, Clause 10E of HRes 8, which eliminates gendered language from the House rules, each member shall be assigned a number and referred to by the assigned number to avoid the use of gendered terms present in the last names of certain
I
members.
reserve a point of order.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. Mr. Buck,
I reserve a point of order.
Point of order has been reserved. Gentleman will proceed. Gentleman
you,
is
Mr.
recognized
Chairman.
for 5 minutes.
Recently, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have become concerned with the use of gendered terms in the House. Among the many provisions in the rules package for this Congress is a section eliminating the use of the terms like daughter, seaman, husband, mother, and even chairman. And now the committee rules have been changed to accommodate the rules that were recently passed by the House as a whole. While I don't find these terms to be offensive in any way, I firmly believe the standards we establish for the House should be consistently and evenly enforced. In fact, Mr. Chairman, if you look at the plaque just in front of your microphone, it appears that you are still referred to as chairman. I do not find that offensive, but some might. But I also looked at the chair's website recently, and it turns out that your website is wildly inconsistent with the House rules. While Section 2, Clause 10 of the House rules dictates that the chairman or chairwoman are now known as chair, Chair Nadler uses the phrase chairman more than 23,000 times on his website, in his personal office and the Judiciary Committee. In fact, he refers to himself as chairman in his biography on his personal office website and again on the home page for this committee's website. This is deeply troubling. And in order to be faithful to the House rules, I believe we need to ensure no gendered language persists in this committee to be consistent. For example, my last name is Buck. Now, buck is oftentimes a term used to describe a male deer, not a female deer. In the Catholic Church, Mr. Bishop's name only refers to a male church official. We have two individuals on this committee, Mr. Chairman, with the last name Johnson. Mr. Johnson from Georgia, Mr. Johnson from Louisiana. They are not John daughter, they are not John person, they are John's son. Now, Mr. Chairman, for that reason, I'm offering this amendment to assign each member of this committee a number and require that they be referred to by that number instead of their last name. By using numbers, we can do away with this gendered terminology and remain consistent with the new House rules. I thank the chair and I yield back.
Gentleman yield back? Gentleman yields back. I recognize
I withdraw
myself.
my point
I
of order.
recognize myself for the purpose of opposing the amendment. The House is in the course of degenderizing the rules. The committee is doing the same thing. And this proposal to use numbers makes a mockery of this, of what we're doing. It makes a mockery of the rules, and I therefore oppose it. I yield back.
Call the question.
The question is called. All in favor of calling the question, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The question occurs on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment will say aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Opposed, no.
No.
The noes have it. The amendment is not adopted. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Back.
Amendment to Rules of Procedure offered by Mr. Johnson of Louisiana. In Rule 3, renumber clauses D through F as clauses E through G, and after clause C, insert the following. D, the chairman or any member designated by the chairman shall administer oaths to all witnesses. Witnesses, when sworn, shall subscribe to the following oath.
Point of order is reserved.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before this committee in the matter now under consideration will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
It's already done.
Thank you.
The gentleman is recognized for the purpose for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the beginning of the last Congress, we all remember that there was a concerted effort to remove the phrase, "So help me God," from the oath that is taken by witnesses that appear before this committee to testify. I am actually very thankful, Mr. Chairman, that you ultimately reversed course on that change in our custom, and you reinserted the phrase in our oaths here in the full committee. However, in at least one of our subcommittees, the Subcommittee on the Constitution, ironically, Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, where I serve as ranking member. The practice was formally abandoned and denied by Chairman Cohen above my vehement and repeated objections. For that reason, I believe we really do need, and I've offered this in good faith, we need the full committee to specify and clarify this in our rules as other House committees do. Throughout America's history, our founders, presidents, statesmen, and fellow patriots have reinforced and understood that the key and the essential foundation of a republic must be a common commitment among the citizenry to at least the general principles of religion and morality and accountability to God. The founders understood that all men are fallen and that power corrupts, and they also knew that no amount of institutional checks and balances or decentralization of power and civil authorities would be sufficient to maintain a just government if the people in charge had no fear of eternal judgment by a power higher than their temporal institutions. For that reason, I offer this simple amendment, which would adopt here the exact language on witness oaths that I pulled verbatim from the rules of the other committee where I serve, the House Armed Services Committee. It's just 6 lines that should not be disputed by anyone. Indeed, the words here are very familiar to almost all Americans and have been since George Washington added the words, "So help me God," to the constitutionally prescribed oath of office when he was sworn in as president on April 30th, 1789, and soon after that, the Judiciary Act of 1789, one of the first pieces of legislation passed by the new Congress, included the words in the oath of office for judges. You heard the language, I'll say it simply. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before this committee in matters now under consideration will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment, which will add certainty to our rules and avoid unnecessary confusion and controversy in our proceedings for the next 2 years. I urge support, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. This amendment is unnecessary because under 18 U.S.C. 1001, it is a criminal offense subject to criminal penalty to lie to Congress whether or not a witness is under oath. So this amendment is completely superfluous as an amendment to the rules. I yield back. Does anyone else seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, can I respond to that?
Mr. Chairman? The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck, is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
I thank the gentleman from Colorado. Mr. Chairman, again, we hear that a common sense amendment to the rules is superfluous. If it was, then the question, and really honest, good faith question is, why do almost all the other committees of the Congress have it included in their rules? If the House Armed Services Committee would have it, and the Natural Resources Committee, for goodness sakes, the Committee on the Judiciary, that is supposed to be the committee that upholds our great institutions and defends the Constitution and all of our great traditions, why in the world would we not have it as part of our rules as well? I don't think that the fact that it's admitted, it says in statute that if someone lies under oath that there's a penalty for that. The reason that we have witnesses sworn in for testimony is because we are reminding them. They're not all experts in statutory law, federal law. The reason that we do this in Congress, we do it in committees, is because we have to remind the persons who appear before us of the solemnity of their testimony and what it means. They have to perform this oath, and you have to understand that it's not just the violation of a federal law if they lie to us, that there is a higher power that they answer to. That was the import. That was the reason that the rule was put into our foundational documents in the very beginning, the beginning, the birth of our traditions. They added this really important admonition. And so to say that it's unnecessary, it's superfluous, or it's stated somewhere in law, to me is kind of a silly argument, honestly. And I'm not trying to be demeaning about that. I just think that what you're saying and what you're arguing here is that the witnesses that come before us who are not constitutional law experts normally, they're not experts in federal statute, would somehow have the knowledge of that. And simply reminding them of what a statute says is not the same as the oath, and that is why we defend that tradition. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back to me. It was my time, Mr. Chairman.
Call the question.
Thank you. And I want to echo the words of my friend from Louisiana. Obviously, there are federal statutes that cover lying to Congress, whether you're under oath or you're not under oath. But there are also federal statutes that cover lying in a courtroom, whether you're under oath or not under oath. There are also federal statutes that cover lying on a tax return, whether you're under oath or not under oath. There are federal statutes that cover lying to all federal officials, under oath or not under oath. The reason to make sure that someone has an oath and that they swear to God that they are telling the truth is because they are reminded that far beyond just the federal legal implications, there is a moral implication to what they're doing. And Mr. Chairman, I think of all the committees that we have in this Congress, this committee should be reminding the people that come before this committee over and over again. When we cover things like impeachment, we may very well, for example, have issues involving the president's son and the allegations that the president's son has used his father's position as vice president and may have committed crimes. Those aren't things that we just want to say to somebody, you may be charged under federal law if you are in violation of this. We want to make sure that if the president's son appears or if others appear before this committee in part of our oversight duty, that they understand how very serious it is that they tell us the truth and the whole truth, not having any wiggle room with the words that they use. And Mr. Chairman, there are dozens of other examples of why this committee's work is so important and necessary to have an oath. And I agree with my friend from Louisiana that other committees do it, and their work sometimes is not as serious in nature, not as public, and certainly doesn't have the consequences that the work of this great Judiciary Committee does. When I look around and see the portraits of the past chairs of this great committee, I realize how serious this committee's work has been in the past, and I also realize that we have had oaths administered to witnesses in the past, and to deviate from that practice now, I think is a serious mistake. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Let me say that there will be many moments of eloquence in this committee because we are a committee mostly of lawyers and those who love the Constitution. Mr. Buck is one of those, and having practiced both in the public and private sector, I believe, as well as Mr. Johnson, all have the opportunity to pose questions and to be eloquent during this time frame. Mr. Johnson has expressed and been quite engaged in the matter of the Constitution, and I respect his knowledge. But I want to just acknowledge a simple fact, even beyond the statutory affirmation of lying to Congress being a criminal act. We do require, chairman of this committee, for an oath to be taken. I, as a Christian, I have a great deal of comfort with "So help me God." But I simply want to remind the gentleman that we are a very diverse nation religiously. We are diverse in many other ways. And I would just have him pause for a moment to acknowledge that if an oath is taken and the words "So help me God" are not there, it may be that a person taking the oath is respecting his religion, but no less serious about the oath. And I would just ask him to consider our responsibilities as the Judiciary Committee in upholding the Constitution and the sacred moments of the Bill of Rights that clearly does protect someone's religious freedom. And so there are many things you could say about this, that your intentions are good, but just think about the freedoms of other persons.
The gentlelady
And that an oath, I will be happy to yield, and that an oath taken is a satisfactory oath to adhere to this committee responsibilities. I yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I want to point out that she is entirely correct. This is the committee that protects religious liberty. This is the committee that ought to be most concerned with protecting religious liberty. And as the gentlelady pointed out, there are many people in this country who do not believe in God. They may believe in something else. They may be Buddhists. They may be other people with beliefs that are different. And it is our duty to protect the religious liberty of all people, not only those who have what some may consider conventional Christian or Jewish views. So the amendment must be opposed because it seeks to impose a religious viewpoint in violation of the separation of church and state, in violation of our committee's commitment to protect religious liberty. And therefore, this amendment must be opposed. I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I yield back to her.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so very much.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose? For what purpose does Mr. Roy seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
And I respect the eloquent statement by the gentlelady from Texas, but I certainly am in concurrence with the gentleman from Louisiana about the importance of "So help you God" in our oaths. For the reasons he explained that I needn't to repeat, it is critical in respect to how we pledge our truthfulness, that we are doing so under God. And when this is the Judiciary Committee, and the gentlelady from Texas talked about the rule of law, and talked about this being a committee full of primarily lawyers. And when you think about, we talk about the issues involving the United States Supreme Court a great deal. I've had cases in front of the Supreme Court when I was the first Assistant Attorney General of Texas. We knew the importance of the Supreme Court. And of course, Moses is depicted twice, inside and out, with the Ten Commandments. We talk about our pledge and Pledge of Allegiance, which we debated earlier, and the importance of under God and the Pledge of Allegiance. It is fundamental and central to who we are as a nation. And when we discuss religious liberty, and I concur with the gentlelady of the importance of our defense of religious liberty, we should do so fully. That does not erase faith from the public square. This is an often debated principle, but it is indeed true and important that does not erase our collective belief as a nation from the public square and our collective reliance on the Almighty and the importance of recognition of the Almighty when we are pledging to each other, whether it's our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, as it was in the Declaration, or whether it is someone here before this body or otherwise pledging that they are telling the truth. I know that my level of questioning my own integrity and who I am rises significantly in prayer, in church, when I'm putting myself before the Almighty and you're questioning who you are and what you do and what you stand for. I think this is fundamental. It is critical. And it is critical for this body, the whole body, the House, but also this body, this committee, to recognize the importance of the Almighty when we're talking about taking an oath. I would yield to the gentleman from Louisiana.
I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding. I just want to point out that Professor Noah Feldman, who is a professor of law at Harvard University, former clerk to U.S. Supreme Court Justice David Souter, has researched this and written about it extensively. You might be interested to know that he affirms, and of course history does, I've followed this my whole life, the words "so help me God" were constantly and customarily used in oaths of office and jurors' oaths in the late 18th century and indeed before. He notes all the history, cites the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1797, that volume, and clarifies the meaning of the phrase was understood differently by different people. The energy of the sentence, it quotes, resides in the particle "so," explained the author of the entry of the oath with grammatical precision. Quote, "upon condition of my speaking the truth or performing this promise, may God help me or not otherwise," unquote. Look, the point is that throughout our history, we've used this. There have been many atheists, agnostics, there have been different sects of Judeo-Christian religions and others who have different beliefs and different interpretations of this. Some may have whispered it silently, some may not have. But the point is, we put it in our oaths and we include it in what we recite to witnesses to affirm the solemnity of the occasion and to point out that there is a higher power. They do not just owe the truth to us, not just to members of Congress, they owe it to a higher power, however they define that. And that is an important tradition for us not to abandon in an age where we all know that truth is jeopardized. It's under assault. some people can't define truth anymore. It is critically important that people come and stand before this Congress and do that thing, to provide accurate testimony. And I think for us to abandon this tradition now, after 244 years, or however long it's been, part of our history, is a perilous practice.
And if the gentleman, if I could reclaim my time, I would just close out, Mr. Chairman, by saying, you know, we talked about religious liberty, as the gentlelady from Texas talked about, and we talked about these rights that we enjoy. The Declaration laid out very clearly and poignantly by Mr. Jefferson that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. That's from which they come. And that is the central pillar upon which this nation was built. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Bishop seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I came forward in some alarm as I heard the chair's first response that oath-taking, this very common oath that the amendment proposes, is superfluous. And what struck me is that initially was just the extraordinary error of that notion, and that oath-taking, in many respects, is prescribed in the Constitution. Senators and representatives are required under the Constitution to take an oath, notwithstanding that their duties exist in law regardless or before the oath is taken. The President of the United States is prescribed an oath, and it is customary, of course, that it be an oath before God. That's been the choice of most. And then as I heard the debate, I was interested that the chairman, perhaps sensing that error after that point had been so well expressed by the gentleman from Louisiana and others, then adopted the gentlelady from Texas answered that it might somehow offend the notion of separation of church and state or someone's religious liberty. But no, that can't be the case, because again, oaths are prescribed in the Constitution that establishes those very rights, the right of religious free exercise. And so that's another error, and the two errors come in such close succession that one wonders, are these arguments not merely pretext for another concern, for another fear, if you will? That is to say, a discomfort with even the mention of the deity, the mention of God in our official proceedings. Is that perhaps the concern? And if so, I would submit that it reinforces, as nothing else could, the cogency of the amendment proposed by Mr. Johnson, that we can never allow this body to embrace the notion that the mention of God, that the resort to the help of God, is at the very heart of this institution, as it has been, and of our organizational documents as they have been from the beginning of this nation. And with that, I don't know, does Mr. Johnson wish me to yield?
I appreciate that, and with this remaining time you have, thank you for yielding. I'll just give you the words of George Washington himself, who said in his farewell address, quote, "Where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths?" They warned us, they forewarned us that we should never abandon those foundations. And as you said, I'm a constitutional law attorney. I was a religious liberty defense lawyer for 20 years before I got here. I've argued every aspect of this debate. You cannot say that it is a violation of the free exercise of religion, or worse, an establishment of religion in the First Amendment, if the preceding articles of the Constitution lay out the oath. It makes no sense. It's not a cogent argument to make. The same founders that drafted the language of the First Amendment, okay, when the day that they wrote the language of the First Amendment and agreed upon it, they opened their proceedings that day with a prayer by the Reverend Jacob Duché, Pennsylvania. The prayer was an overt Christian prayer. Okay, they didn't see that as a violation of the First Amendment. They believed in the free exercise of religion. So you can't come in here and make the separation of church and state argument about the oath that we take to the Constitution to defend the truth and to testify in accordance with the truth. This has never been a part of our history, and we should not begin now to make it a new chapter of history. It's a dangerous thing. And I'm not trying to be dramatic about this. I just can't believe that we have come to this place where we cannot follow these most basic traditions that date all the way back to our founding. And I yield back.
With the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman. I yield
Back to
to
Jim.
Mr. Roy.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I closed out my first statement regarding the endowment of our inalienable rights from our Creator. I mean, keep in mind, as the gentleman from Louisiana was talking about in our founding, right? I went to the University of Virginia, right? It's all steeped in all things Thomas Jefferson and Mr. Jefferson. And a lot is made of his letter to the Danbury Baptists and separation of church and state, which, of course, was not any of the initial founding documents. It was a letter. It was Jefferson, who is often invoked in this way. It was Jefferson who put, endowed by our Creator with these certain inalienable rights. That, again, I will repeat, is the central pillar upon which everything else was built in the Constitution the gentleman from Louisiana and the gentleman from North Carolina referred to. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Owen seek recognition? Put on your mic.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
What I'm hoping that I can bring to this body as I speak to you is acknowledgement of great generations that came before us, because we have not been taught that. We haven't talked about the greatness of my race for generations, the things they overcame, the success they've had, the production they've put into our nation. The message, the narrative, we went from slavery to one day being free by white people's civil rights. I'm going to tell you, as time moves on, why we were so successful, why we're so competitive. At the end of the day, there was no race that believed in God than we did. Matter of fact, our belief in our Heavenly Father allowed us to say, no matter what you say about me, no matter what you do, I'm better than that because I'm made in an image, a power much greater than the evil is. I think it's important that we recognize today where we find the most danger, the most damage. You look at these communities now, they're nothing like what I grew up in, nothing. What is not happening there? These young people are not taught about God. They're not taught that you close the door, you turn off the light, that you're still going to be seen by a God who has the power to see everything. And they think they can bully, hurt, damage, and get away with it. What's made this country great, the reason why we have such a diversity in religions, is we believe there's a God that we all worship, no matter what religion we are, or no matter whether we worship him at all. And that's the freedom we've given. That's what gives us a latitude to accept each other, because we learn, because we believe in him, that we can look at each other inside out versus outside in. I think this path we're going along is pretty dangerous. We have leaders that cannot say, let's put into our process, so help me God. It's dangerous. And it gives an idea of which direction we're going in. We can't continue to do that. Not if we plan on getting our kids and our young people excited about their future, believing in their dreams, believing in themselves. And this whole thing about racism, guess what happens? The more we believe in him, the less we do that. Hatred, anger, mayhem ends when we believe in God in heaven. So I hope that you reconsider not voting against this. It's simple. Again, it's not just words, it's an act. We talk about acts. Let's make sure we do the acts that brings us together. This is one of them. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question occurs on the amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No.
No.
The rules have it.
Recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren?
No.
Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Cohen?
No.
Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Deutsch? Ms. Bass? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Jeffries votes no. Mr. Cicilline? Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell?
No.
Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Liu?
No.
Mr. Liu votes no. Mr. Raskin?
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Jayapal?
No.
Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Demings? Ms. Demings votes no. Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes no. Ms. Garcia?
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Neguse?
No.
Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath?
No.
Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Stanton? Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean? Ms. Escobar?
No.
No.
Ms. Dean?
Ms. Dean needs to turn on her camera if she wishes to vote.
Mr. Jones? Oh, Ms. Dean?
And her microphone. Ms. Dean?
Hear me now?
Yes, Ms. Dean?
Ms. Dean votes no.
Ms. Dean votes no. Mr. Jones?
Thank you.
Mr. Jones votes no. Ms. Ross?
No.
Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Bush? Mr. Jordan? Yes. Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. Gomert? Mr. Gomert votes aye. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes aye. Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Biggs? Mr. McClintock? Mr. Stubbe? Oh, Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Stubbe votes yes. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey? Mr. Massey votes aye. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes aye. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Fishbach? Ms. Fishbach, you're on mute.
They're not voting yet, are they? They're on the floor.
Mr. Biggs?
Mr. Biggs, you are not recorded. Mr. Biggs votes aye. Ms. Fishbach?
Ms. Fishbach, you may want to unmute yourself.
What? Who's Ms. Fishbach? Is she on?
Mr. Buck, you are not recorded.
Is she in our call?
Mr. Buck votes aye.
Oh, that's what oh, she's actually using virtual? That's why.
Okay. Ms. Fishbach votes aye. Ms. Sparts? Ms. Sparts votes yes. Mr. Fitzgerald?
She's not here?
Mr. Bentz? Mr. Bentz votes yes. Mr. Owens? Mr. Owens votes yes.
Are there any other amendments who wish to vote who haven't voted?
Chairman? How am I recorded?
That was Ms.
Ms. Jackson Lee, you are not recorded.
I vote no.
Ms. Jackson Lee votes no.
Are there any other members who wish to be recorded who haven't been recorded? The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 17 ayes and 22 noes.
The amendment is not adopted. Are there any other amendments? A reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion. On the a reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion that the rule be adopted. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the rules are adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to House rules, the rules adopted by the Committee on the Judiciary for the 117th Congress will be published in the Congressional Record and made available to members and the public on the committee's website. The next order of business is the ratification of subcommittee assignments. Before you are rosters of full committee members, including the chair and ranking member, as well as the members of each subcommittee, including chairs and ranking members, as approved separately by the committee's Democratic Caucus and the Republican Conference. Is there further discussion before we vote on approving the roster? The question is on approving the appointments and assignments for the list of subcommittee chairs and ranking members as set forth in the rosters be approved. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the chairs and ranking members are appointed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. We will now consider subcommittee assignments. A copy of the subcommittee rosters has been provided to you. Unless there is further discussion of these rosters, I move that the subcommittee assignments as set forth in the rosters be approved. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and the subcommittee rosters are approved. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Chairman?
What purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I seek permission to make a brief statement.
Gentleman will proceed.
As we embark on the pressing work ahead of us, I want to take a moment to reflect on the remarkable work of my colleagues during the last Congress. On a bipartisan basis, the Antitrust Subcommittee conducted a historic investigation into the state of competition in the digital marketplace. As part of this top-to-bottom review, we held 7 hearings to examine the effects of market power online, and we heard directly from the chief executives of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. We also interviewed more than 240 market participants and received expert testimony and submissions from scores of witnesses and leading antitrust experts. The investigation culminated in a 450-page report that outlines our findings and includes a menu of options for our path forward to strengthen the antitrust laws and restore competition online. As part of this process, the members and staff of the subcommittee from both sides of the aisle worked diligently to review evidence and understand a complex set of issues. The record and report would not be as robust and impactful without these contributions. In light of these efforts, I want to take a moment to thank my colleagues and their staff for all of their diligent work throughout the investigation. I particularly want to acknowledge our committee staff, led by Slade Bond, for their incredible work and commitment to this extraordinary effort. In addition, I want to thank my colleague, Congressman Buck, for his thoughtful approach to this process and congratulate him on his selection as ranking member of the subcommittee. I look forward to getting to work right away. Although I had planned to request unanimous consent to order the report to be printed at today's meeting, it is my understanding that Ranking Member Jordan has expressed concerns with this request in light of the committee's new membership. With that in mind, I'd like to take a moment to address these concerns to help find common ground. Ordering the report out of committee is simply a formal mechanism for having the report printed along with any additional or dissenting views. It does not mean that we all agree on every finding or recommendation. To the extent that we disagree, that disagreement is reflected in the supplemental, additional, or dissenting views. I hope this clarification addresses these concerns, and I look forward to considering this matter at the earliest possible opportunity during the committee's next markup if objection continues to be heard on the unanimous consent request. I thank the chairman for this opportunity to offer these remarks and yield back.
Does this,
I would just, Mr. Chairman, like to thank Ms. Cicilline in Mr. Jordan's absence. He asked me to thank you for that courtesy. We will have the ongoing dialogue. And the concern, as he stated, was genuine, that we have many new members of the committee and they have not yet been exposed to that. So we would ask for that due consideration. We're grateful you gave it. So thank you for that.
this concludes the order of business for today's meeting. I thank the members for being here today, and I look forward to working together with all of you this Congress. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.